Welcome to episode 3 of the EdUp Smart Space podcast. Hello, I'm Craig Park, your host. Today's theme is Integrated Technology's critical role in academic learning space design. My guest is Don Merritt, Director of Instructional Resources at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Welcome, Don.
Thanks, Craig. It's good to be here with you.
So, Don, I've known you for a bit, but why don't you tell the audience about your work at the University of Central Florida, how it bridges the gap between instructional innovation and campus infrastructure? Can you share a little bit about your professional journey and what drew you into this space?
Sure. It actually goes way back to high school. I grew up in a very rural area of Virginia, right on the Virginia-Kentucky border, and we did not have as many options when it came to subjects to take as one would hope. I was actually one of those students in high school who took satellite classes, and I thought that worked really well for me. I did Latin and I did trigonometry. That was kind of fun. And then when I went to college, the college that I went to, East Tennessee State University, had an interactive TV program that I ended up working for as a student. I kept doing that sort of thing, and eventually when I came to Orlando, I actually went into broadcast. So my background is broadcast production, television, radio, all of that. I was working for the NBC affiliate here in Orlando in 1999 and got to know some folks here at UCF, had an opportunity to come and teach for a couple of semesters. And then when a position came open full-time with UCF's interactive technology program, I ended up getting that job, and I've been here full-time ever since. I came to the university with that kind of background, and my first experience with the university being as an adjunct faculty member. I consider myself a technologist, but not a technophile. My approach has always been, even when I was running the ITV program, we're supporting people. The technology is what allows us to do that, but we're trying to help our faculty teach and our students to learn. That's always been my focus in all of this, and that's the program we've built in our office too. We're responsible for the classrooms at UCF, audio, video. We do design all the way to installation and support. It's a soup to nuts operation. I also have event support under my purview. I've got student-facing assistance with some student labs, and I also have the business relationship management team under my supervision now too. So connected to a lot of different things across campus, but again, always focusing on that relationship to how do we serve our constituents. You know, it's not about providing the technology, it's about providing the service. Technology just allows us to do that.
And a lot of hats. That's got to be a complex day.
Some days are more complex than others, but yeah.
I had a chance years ago to come over and tour UCF and see some of the facilities. I was really impressed with the level of standardization that was in place across the campus's audiovisual systems, something that I have always advocated for so that faculty had a similar experience room to room. And UCF was one of the first that really put in place a very high level of standardization. UCF has long been a pioneer in blended and tech-enabled learning. How has that shaped your campus's wide approach to facility technology planning?
I actually have to give credit to our faculty. Back in about 1995-96, UCF built their first integrated AV classroom, and the faculty loved it so much that the faculty senate that year passed a resolution that you will do this in any room with more than 50 seats. We started doing this back in the 90s, and that's really allowed us to get to the level that we're at now. I can't take full credit for this. There was a lot of folks before me who put this floor in place, but we've been for the past 30 years talking very closely about what our faculty need in the spaces to teach their classes, making sure that they feel supported when they do that, and helping our students to integrate in those spaces too. One of the responsibilities for Instructional Resources early on was helping faculty transition their old analog teaching materials into digital teaching materials. We had a multimedia center, a multimedia lab that faculty came to, and we helped them actually do a lot of that transition. That's why we've got a lot of the AV experience in our team. It's historical. Some of those teams have rolled off to other areas of the university, but we still have that history with us.
And it's great when the voice of the customer is listened to. It leads into my next question. Why is it important to embed instructional technology planning early in a new building design process?
Well, the way a room is designed has a big impact on how you design the AV. Oftentimes, people don't think much about, well, it's just a TV. What does it matter? It's just a projector screen. Well, there are viewing angles. You talk to a student, you got a single display in a room, and it's a wide room. Somebody over in that far left front corner can't see what's on the screen. That's an issue. They are not going to completely rearrange the room. They are not going to use that room the way you think they're going to because they can't see the materials that are being presented. You have to have these conversations at the same time. We can adapt to a lot of different room styles and room layouts, but if you're not involving us in that conversation up front, you're going to spend a lot of money to retrofit it after people get in there and you realize what you created is not going to work for them.
That's interesting. That's a theme. My first two interviews expressing the same guidance and frustration when that's not done. You mentioned viewing angles. What are some of the other key considerations for designing classrooms, lecture halls, and informal learning spaces?
Well, being able to hear what's going on is one. There are a lot you can do physically with acoustics, but you're going to end up putting voice reinforcement in most of those spaces. I would tell you to put voice reinforcement whether you need it or not, because eventually someone in that space will need it. It's better to be prepared for that up front than, again, to try to go back and retrofit it later. You can go out and talk to anyone who provides any kind of student accessibility support or accommodation support, and they'll tell you hearing impairment is one of the things that students often underestimate. We typically underestimate the number of our students who actually have a challenge being able to hear what's going on in a classroom. More and more students are recording what's going on in a classroom now so that they can go back and use it as study materials later, whatever the case. Putting that technology in ahead of time, it will help some of those student learning outcomes long term because they've already got access to that. I know there are some concerns around that. And before 2020, those concerns were a lot stronger. But now most people are more comfortable with the idea that there are recording devices in the room. They know it's there. We've been doing it for the past few years. So now that folks are more comfortable with it, we should really just be doing it everywhere.
As a designer advocating for archival recording of sessions simply because the digital native student would rather listen to that lecture or watch the lecture before coming into class so that they're prepared for any kind of team-based opportunities in the classroom.
Yeah, but I'm of two minds with that one. There's a lot of value in that, but there's also the risk that you take away from what's actually happening in the face-to-face experience if you over rely on that. The archival part is great. I think there's a lot of value in it, but you don't want to underestimate or undermine the actual face-to-face present interaction when that's taking place in those kinds of spaces. The more we can create a space where more people can participate, the more successful the students are going to be coming out of there.
Right. Can you walk us through how UCF approaches the design of a new academic facility with AB and IT and pedagogical needs in mind?
Sure. I think like most places, it's an ever-evolving process. But what usually happens is the facilities folks meet with the folks who are going to be assigned to a space. We talk about what the needs are, what their pedagogical needs are, what their expectations are. Then as we start building out the building plan and the building schedule, we get brought in to help flesh out some of the needs that technology is going to need to provide in those spaces. My office tries to not be prescriptive in what goes into the spaces. We make it clear that we have a standard, and this is a baseline standard. And to your point earlier, one of the reasons we do that is so that no matter what space a faculty member or a student goes to, they know what their experience is going to be like. That's really, really important. Speaking as someone who has taught many, many years, I don't want to think about how do I have to change my class this semester for the space that I'm in. I want to design my class and be able to teach it everywhere. That's one of the reasons why we try to ensure we have a standard experience from space to space. That's really what we focus on. I want to highlight that standard experience part too. When technology people or planning people like us talk about standards, we're usually talking about some sort of cut sheet, some sort of list of these are the products we put in here, this is how we do them all. We, though, when we talk about it, try to talk about the standard experience for the users so that in a perfect world, none of my users would know the names of any of the products I put in the space. They would call it by what it does and not by the manufacturer name. It's hard to get people to think that way, but if you do then change a standard, or for some reason you can't source this particular product and you got to go with a different one, it really confuses people. If you can just start with that experience focus first, you're going to create a much better campus environment for everyone.
I would agree. The graphical user interface now that we've evolved into touchscreens is ultimately programmable. Finding a common layout and sequence that we go through when we start, that the logic behind it makes sense, and the function is when I turn on something, it turns on. I don't care what it is as long as the image is up and I can hear or be heard. What technologies, AV, wireless, collaboration, are now considered non-negotiables in your learning outing environments?
For us, the baseline is always a display, a system to control this display. Wireless sharing is now standard in our operation. Document cameras are still standard. We'll see how long that goes. Right now, we still have an in-room computer that is standard and voice lift. So,
Or
yeah, and sound system of some sort. So those are really the baseline. And I describe that as our platform, for lack of a better term. We can build almost anything on that base platform for any kind of lab, any kind of space. So long as you have those standard experience elements in there, we can add any other thing you want to it. And to your point too, the graphical user interfaces nowadays, so long as I'm keeping all of those standard items consistent from space to space, I can add anything else on there I want to. But someone who does not need that technology can still use that space because it will still work the way they expect it. It just also happens to have a couple of other extra options in there. Right? It's all about focusing on that standard, and then you add something on top of it. You never completely redesign when you go from space to space.
what what has been a standout project or space at UCF where integrated technology significantly enhanced the learning outcome or faculty engagement?
I'm actually going to lean back on a project that we did a number of years ago. We call it the Sandbox. And I know a lot of people have Sandbox spaces. I think ours is a little different from others in that in order to have a class in the Sandbox space, you have to be scheduled there for the entire semester. You don't drop in for a couple of classes and test something out. We put you in there the entire time. The Sandbox is a space where we can test out new technologies before we scale them up. We have literally hundreds of classrooms at multiple campuses. I need to know what the cost of ownership is going to be on that thing before I roll it out. Part of the cost of ownership is how many people are actually going to use it. What's my ROI on this thing? But more than that, faculty also use it as a space to come in and experiment with different pedagogies, different methods for teaching whatever it is they're doing. It's like a joint lab space for both teaching and for technology. It has been one of my all-time favorite spaces. Whenever we bring people in there, we're like, this is not a template. I just want you all to know that we have no intention to do this all over campus. We're just testing stuff out in here. My favorite thing about it is we've tested stuff out there and we've gone, we were never going to scale this thing up to the rest of campus. It's those no's that are more important than the yeses. Because on paper, some of these technologies look fantastic. Look, this seems like the perfect solution. You put a few classes in there for a semester and nobody ever uses it. Or they only use one little small part of it. Why am I going to pay for this entire package when they're only using this one little piece that this other product will also deliver? So it's that ability to avoid low ROI decisions down the road that for me is fantastic. But it's also a multi-display space, movable furniture. It's what most people would think of when you think an active learning classroom. The fact that so many faculty have gone through there and adapted their teaching practices, we've been able to move some of those concepts out into other spaces. That's the part that's the most valuable for me, is that the faculty actually feel like it's a valuable space for them too.
I'm a big advocate for sandbox spaces. It's come up more often than not. And when I talk about them, the campuses that don't have them say, how do we build one?
It's not just about building it, it's also about supporting it, because you can't put the faculty in there and just leave them hanging. We tell them, now there's technology in here we've not tried. It may fail on you, but we're close. We can come help this out. Are you okay with that? We also usually work with the Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning to scaffold their teaching practice changes that they're trying to make too, so that we're all working on this thing together. Throwing people into a high technology space and not preparing them for that space or getting them ready for that space, there's a lot of research that suggests that student learning outcomes go down. That is not what you want to do. You want to make sure that you are supporting your faculty before you throw them at it.
Great. I want to talk a little bit about future ready strategies and institutional collaboration. How do you manage cross-campus collaboration between instructional designers, facilities planner, and the IT departments on each of your campuses?
For UCF, a lot of those are one and the same. Our only instructional designers, official instructional designers, are actually with our Division of Digital Learning. Our instructional design teams are actually focused on, for the most part, on our online classes, of which we have quite a few. About half, actually sometimes over half of our student credit hours every semester are generated online. When it comes to the facilities and the technology design, though, there are really only two groups to work with, and that's the institutional facilities folks and UCF IT, the central IT that I'm a part of. There are some federated units out there for technology, but not for facilities. So you're generally working with the same people from space to space to space. That has allowed us to also be pretty consistent no matter what campus that we go to. And that's been a huge boon for us and, frankly, our faculty and students too.
What are some of the challenges or misconceptions you often face when it comes to technology planning?
Oh, there's a list. I think the one that drives me the most is it goes back to my comment earlier. You have to support people who are going to use the technology. Technology is a tool. Technology does not use itself. If you are not helping people figure out how to use a technology effectively, it's not going to deliver what you think it's going to deliver. Buying something off the shelf and shoving it into a classroom is not going to instantly improve your student outcomes. The biggest thing I try to impress on people is that, sure, we can build all of the quote unquote active learning classrooms you want. Unless you are helping faculty redesign their class to take advantage of that, it is not going to make any difference. And so for me, that's more the big thing. When it comes to particular technologies, AV over IP is the way that we're all going now. I look forward to the day when we can rely more on wireless connectivity instead of having to pull as many cables as we do, but we're probably several years away from that at this point. For me, again, it goes back to the people thing. I'm a technologist, not a technophile. I want to talk about how people are using the technology. That's the important part for me.
How do you balance the pace of technological change with the long timelines involved in facilities planning and capital projects? As architects, typically when we start, I'll call first pencil on paper, it's 3 years later when that building opens. You mentioned you have hundreds of active technology-equipped classrooms. What's your refresh process, and how do you look at change? How do you strategically look at change over time?
It's funny you ask that question because we sometimes hear people get frustrated when we talk about a technology refresh plan. They wait for the funding before they create the plan. What we did back in 2020 was created a 5-year refresh plan. Would everything on there need to be replaced every 5 years? No, but we looked at all of the spaces we had and we said, all right, in the ideal world, every 5 years we would refresh our technology and this is how we would do it. Now, our budget does not support a 5-year refresh plan. So we stretch it out to whatever our budget will support, but we have that plan we can always refer back to. All we're doing year to year is making adjustments to that existing plan. For us, on the technology refresh side, is always what the budget will allow us to drive, but we're always looking at what's coming next, what we'll be able to get to. Because we focus more on the experience, on the functionality of the space, I'm not as worried if I can't get this particular device in 2 or 3 years. There will be another replacement for it. It may come from a different manufacturer, but I know there will be something else there. Because we are moving more and more to AV over IP, I know so long as I'm putting network drops in certain locations around the room, I can plug whatever I want to into those spaces. I'm less worried about that part of it now. I'm much more focused right now on the refresh plan. And again, as budgets shift, you've got to adjust up and down. We make different decisions about what needs to be replaced in a space depending on how much use it has, what kind of experience we have across the board. Because we do so much product integration at scale, I got a pretty good sense of what's going to last and what's not. We try to factor that into some of our planning too.
We've seen a new cohort, the alpha generation now coming into schools, replacing the Zs and the millennials as our majority student body. In what ways are contemporary student learning behaviors and expectations influencing the way you design classrooms?
I would say it's not just impacting how we're designing classrooms, but how we're designing spaces across the board. The building that my office and the majority of my team is in is called Classroom Building 1 here on campus. There are a couple of nooks, alcoves on the second and third floor that are basically student study spaces. A few years ago, we had the opportunity to put some displays in there that students could connect to, with the assumption that they would use it to work on a paper or something like that. Okay, that was fine. But because they're right outside of our offices, we walk past them all the time. We walked past one point and they had brought in an Xbox and connected it to one of the devices. And we saw it and we walked on. Then we had a conversation about it. It was like, is this a problem? At the end of the day, when we walked back by, they were doing a group project. Same group, but they were doing a group project this time with the Xbox still sitting there on the desk. They expect to be able to interact with the technology in whatever way they want to. For us, if they're using it to learn, but they're also using it to burn off some steam. I mean, student well-being, student wellness is one of the things we're focused on right now too. Why do we have a problem with that? And so our decision was we don't. And that's going to vary depending on building and depending on the location here on campus. But for my team and for the spaces we directly manage, we are here to serve the students. We are buying this stuff with funding that they are helping to bring to the university. At the end of the day, it's their stuff. So long as they're taking care of it, we're trying to not be prescriptive about what they do with it. It's so fun to walk past some of these group areas and watching the students just interact. You've got some over here working individually. You've got these others programming, obviously, a robot that they're going to do somewhere else, and the group over here beside of them preparing for a business presentation. That's the kind of dynamic experience you want to see on a college campus. Why would we get in the way of that? That's what we're here for.
Exactly. So how do you incorporate faculty feedback into your planning process for technology and learning environments?
We not only design and build them, but we also support them. We work with faculty all the time. We are across the hall in Classroom Building 1 from the Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning. We've always been closely associated with them. We're always soliciting faculty feedback. We've got a number of faculty that we have developed very close relationships with over the years from multiple different colleges and units. We're always looking for that opportunity. We look at incidents as they come in, and if we're starting to see a pattern, we talk about, is this a design issue? How can we work around this sort of thing? You've got to have that kind of constant feedback in your processes to ensure you are constantly improving. But we try to get that one-on-one faculty focus too. So if it's not me, it's one of my assistant directors out there going to faculty meetings, telling them what we're putting in there, soliciting their feedback that way. We've got over 2,000 faculty here on campus. We're not going to be able to talk to every single one, but anyone who will give us feedback, we take that feedback. Obviously, you can't act on everything, but it is always something that gets discussed. And it's like, we always ask ourselves, is this something we need to be thinking about going forward?
What is the role of AI, learning analytics? How does that frame or inform any of the decisions you make?
Right now, it's not having as big an impact as I think it will down the road. I would expect AI to become much more involved in how we do our design and how we manage and support and how faculty and students interact with the technologies that we put into these spaces. But at present, it's not having a huge impact. But we are talking about it. In our leadership meeting yesterday, we kicked the meeting off with, how are you using AI right now? We went around the table to talk, each of the teams talked about how they were or were not using it individually or as a team. Where it's having the bigger impact is in the business processes behind the scenes. Inside the classroom, we're working to make sure we've got good wireless coverage, good power, because, if you're on a laptop or something like that, that's one of the ways you're interacting with AI. If you're going to do that in the space, you've got to ensure you've got that kind of support in the spaces. But other than that, we're not doing a lot yet. I'm sure there's more to come up.
Are you doing anything with immersive media, AR, augmented reality, virtual reality in any of your classes?
There are pockets of that around campus. That's another one where how do you scale that has been the big question. For instance, if you're using an Oculus or something like that, how are you going to manage that? That is a high touch overhead product. That's going to limit the number of places you can put that in. And if you don't have the staff to do that sort of thing, that's going to limit it a bit. There are some programs, however, that are leaning pretty heavily into it. I've seen some examples of the College of Medicine using it to help teach doctors how to suture, those sorts of things. It makes a lot of sense for that. I've seen some folks in some of the counseling areas use it in that kind of experience. There's a lot of opportunity for it, but it's really more case by case at this point. I think as these devices become a bit more consumer friendly, a bit easier to access, we will see more of it in classrooms. But until we can reduce that people overhead in managing these devices, it's going to stay pretty located. The flip side of that too, though, is that where's the content for these things coming from? We do not have a lot of folks out there who can design that kind of content. That's actually one area where I would expect AI, especially as we see products like Sora getting much better at video. That's where I would see AI having the bigger impact, large scale, in the nearer future, but we'll see how that one plays out.
Extending that topic, I always ask my guests the question, what comes after, what comes next, where you get to be an informed science fiction writer. Looking ahead 5 to 10 years, how do you envision academic spaces evolving? What emerging technologies or hybrid learning models do you anticipate seeing?
It's a really good question. There's a lot of pushback right now on the hybrid model because of everything we've been through over the past few years. I think, though, that's a pendulum swing. and it will come back to something a bit more balanced than we had in the past. UCF, as I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of online learning here, but we also have a lot of good faculty scaffolding around it, and our students know what to expect with it. And to be perfectly frank, I think our experience with hybrid over the past few years has been better than the majority of folks out there. Other schools who have practices like ours have done similarly well, but the majority of schools out there did not, especially K-12. That will change. One of the things I also foresee is construction. I expect to slow down a bit over the next several years. A lot of schools are getting to a point where they are going to be square footage constrained, either because they don't have the funds to build or because they are actually physically constrained by their location. We were going to have to think differently about how we use some of the square footage we already have. I do think hybrid is going to have a role to play in that, but it's also going to take that scaffolding. What I expect in the future is that our rooms become even more white box, for lack of a better word, where people can come in and do whatever they want to do. I mean, I'm starting to get excited about large flat panel displays. They're finally getting to a price point where they might be competitive with projectors and screens. Like, I think that's going to be the bigger sea change in the next 10 years than anything else. Because projectors are nice because you can get a big image, but you can't get the same quality as you can with a flat panel. You can do a video wall, but that's not really scalable, especially at a university our size. But as these panels get bigger, as they get cheaper, that's going to give us an opportunity to do more in spaces. We're going to need our faculty and students to help us think about how they want to interact with the information that they want to interact with. We are going to have to listen more. It's going to be less about building to this rectangle that we have sitting in front of us and more about building to this entire wall, and how do people get things up there and manipulate it and arrange it so people can see it and interact with it. That's where I see us being in 10 years. I don't know what the answer to that is going to be. I see a few promising starts out there. And it, like you mentioned earlier, Infocom is always a great place to go see some of those things. There are plenty of others too, but that's where I see us in 5 to 10 years, is much more white box space. Again, we're going to have to build some scaffolding for our faculty and students so that they understand what we're trying to do and make the most out of the technology in that space.
I agree. I remember it must be, I don't know, when we saw the first dvLEDs on the Infocom show floor, and then a couple of years later, there were 10 times as many. The next year, there were double that. And for those audience who have not attended an AVIXA, the Audiovisual Integrated Experience Association's annual trade show is in Orlando this June. You should attend if you're interested at all in where things are going. You will definitely see the latest in direct view LED screens. To your point, Don, they are getting finer and brighter and lower cost every year. And you look at the reality of it, it's a 10-year, 100,000 hour lifespan to half-life. Even though it is more expensive in the immediate capital spend, long term, it probably pencils out to be less expensive than a projector and a screen and the challenges that come with that.
It's the cost of ownership that's always a problem. People love to pay for this technology. Then year 2, they forget that they actually need their operating costs associated with that. The more we can put stuff up there that reduces our operating costs, that makes me happy.
You also mentioned earlier AV over IP, and I think that's another area we've seen growth and a demand for enterprise audiovisual management. That's where we'll see some AI tools come into place that will help manage that system. The new IPMX standard, we should start to see products align and be able to talk to each other more readily. There's a lot of good innovations we'll look for at this year's Infocom.
I'll actually be speaking there with our director for emergency planning. We use a lot of these technologies to dashboard what our systems look like. We're in Orlando. We're in Florida. We have hurricanes all the time. So disaster planning, disaster recovery are big things for us. The technology being able to tell us when it is healthy and when it is not helps us plan for that kind of disaster recovery. Last hurricane we have come through here, I was the only person from our team who had to come back on campus to check rooms after the storm because we were able to look at the dashboard and there were only 6 spaces that were not reporting home. That meant that the rest of the team could stay home with their families, finish cleaning up their homes. I mean, we talk about the ROI and the cost and all this other kinds of things, but you forget about the people cost and the people opportunities that these sorts of technologies bring to the plate too.
Excellent. Where can listeners learn more about UCF's approach to learning space innovation and your work?
You can always find us on our website, oir.edu. help.ucf.edu. You can find me on LinkedIn. I go through different phases where I'm more active than others on there. I'm actually in a quiet phase right now. I had some other teams added to me at the beginning of the year, so been busy with that. But there are also a number of professional organizations I would suggest folks check out. HETMA is one. The Educational Technology Collaborative is another one, ETC. You may not have heard about ETC because it had a different name until just a few years ago. I'm a former president of that association, and I would strongly recommend if you're in higher ed or even higher ed adjacent, we're talking to folks with courts and with museums and libraries and folks like that. We've got a lot of knowledge to share with each other. So check out all of these organizations. UCF is involved in quite a few of them, so you can find a lot about us there too.
I'm going to share a link in the description of this podcast to an article that Don and I co-wrote that appeared in the Society of College and University Planning's Journal for Planning for Higher Education on translational interactions between lab researchers and ways to encourage that across the culture of research and education.
Yes.
That was fun. So a pleasure always, Don, to see you again and to get to talk to you. I'm sure our audience will find this inspiring and informative.
Thanks for the opportunity, Craig. Always a pleasure.
And to our audience, thank you again for listening. Please follow us on Spotify, Apple, and Audible, and please tell your friends about the EdUp Smart Space podcast. And thanks again to the EdUp Experience for their support of this program. You can learn more at edupexperience.com. Until next time, I'm your host, Craig Park. Let's keep building smarter spaces together.